Good afternoon and welcome to part one of the ALCTS webinar, two-part series on standards for collection management. I'm Allison Armstrong, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, and will be your host for this afternoon's webinar. Our first presenter today is Nettie Lagace, the Associate Director for Programs at NISO since 2011. She is responsible for facilitating the work of NISO's topic committees and development groups for standards and best practices, and for working with the community to encourage broad adoption of this consensus work. Prior to joining NISO, Nettie worked at Ex Libris in a number of library and information provider-facing roles. She holds an MILS from the University of Michigan. Our second presenter today will be Betty Landesman, the Head of Technical Services and Content Management at the University of Baltimore since 2012. Prior to that, she worked at a number of academic and special libraries in technical services, electronic resources management, collection development, and systems roles. Betty has served as co-chair of the Content and Collection Management Topic Committee of the National Information Standards Organization, NISO, since 2011. She holds an MLS from Simmons College. A few things to keep in mind for today's presentation. Today's webinar does not have interactive chat capabilities. If you wish to comment on today's presentation using Twitter, you may use the hashtag on the previous screen. If you have questions for Betty or Nettie, please type them into the question box on your screen, and they will answer them as time permits at the end of this presentation. Questions which remain unanswered while we are on the air will be answered offline, and the answers will be sent to all attendees. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording, the presentation slides, and an evaluation within 2 days. Please take time to fill out the evaluation form since it will be used by the committee to plan future events. And there will be a slight delay as I turn the presentation over to Nettie.
Hi everybody, I'm very happy to be here as I start sharing my screen. And thank you, Allison, and thank you, ALCTS, and also thank you, Betty, my colleague, for putting together this program for us to talk to you today about different standards. Betty and I are co-presenters on today's webinar and on Thursday's continuation of this webinar. And I just wanted to point out that I'm the person on the left and Betty's the person on the right on your screen. So in case you meet us in real life, you'll know what we look like, which unfortunately doesn't come through on a virtual webinar, at least not in 2014 just yet. So we have an agenda for today. And today's agenda is to give a little bit of introduction to standards, and particularly the standards at NISO. That's the National Information Standards Organization, the organization for which I work. And we're going to start then talking about, well, 3-4 different initiatives that we hope do help the world of librarians and vendors and systems providers get along. And the lawnmower across the street just started up, so I hope that's not too bad. I'm going to keep going. So what's NISO? NISO is the National Information Standards Organization, and this is our little bullet list of different things that we emphasize and things that we do. And I want to emphasize a couple of things and hopefully not read off the bullet points, but we are nonprofit. And when people at cocktail parties ask me what I do, I say I work for a trade association, because people who are not associated with libraries typically understand what trade associations are doing. We are accredited by ANSI, which is the American National Standards Institute, and they are the ones that give us our kind of imprimatur, make sure that all of our standards follow rules that really emphasize openness and sharing and making the process really as open as possible. So much of our notes, all of our votes have to be made available and make sure that we're coming to agreement on different things so that in cases, and in our case there really aren't that many cases where might get contentious, that the process is as open as possible. And you might have known us for being responsible for the original ISSN, the original DOI, Dublin Core Metadata, Open URL, SIP and NSIP, the record standard for MARC Z39.50, and ISBN. And many of these have since been taken up by ISO, the International Standards Organization, but we are the ones who started them. Because we are accredited by ANSI, and ANSI is a member of ISO, the International Standards Organization, we are accredited by ANSI to represent the entire United States interests to the Committee on ISO that manages information and documentation. And the number of that committee is just TC46. It's just a number from ISO. But as that, we are representing the United States vote on all the particular international library and information related areas. We also serve as secretariat for the smaller subcommittee that is concerned with identifiers. So things like DOIs and ISSNs, we make sure that the work of that group is running very smoothly. But really the most important part about NISO is that we are a volunteer-driven organization. And Betty mentioned, or Allison mentioned Betty's role on the Content and Collections Management Topic Committee, and Betty in particular has been involved with NISO for many, many years, and we are grateful to people like Betty who are helping us do our work in libraries, in vendors, in system providers, and publishers to make life easier for everybody. And I want to invite everyone here today to also consider different ways that you might like to volunteer for NISO. So just a very brief kind of diagram on how standards work, at least as far as NISO runs them. And this is my job here at NISO, is to facilitate the work of the different groups that are creating standards and recommended practices, which are kind of a lower level document. Someone has an idea for something that they think should become a standard. More often, the idea is voiced in the terms of a problem or a mismatch, or life would be so much easier if I didn't have to do X, or things went easier in Y. And they put together essentially a business case. And this is just a very short document. It's a written document. It's 2 pages long that states what the problem is, how it could be solved with a standard or recommended practice, who are the stakeholders, what is their role, and kind of just making sure that people who might be considered to be part of this group could become part of it. So it goes through an approval process where NISO topic committees, and we have 3 leadership topic committees that consist of members of the community who help us determine what needs to be done in our work. They approve the business case, and then it goes out to the NISO voting members who then look at it for a period of 30 days, and it gets approved. And at that point, it becomes an actual working group. So sometimes, actually most of the time, we'll put out a call to the community to try to solicit, enroll members of the community to be part of the working group. So you might see in our newsletter these calls for participation coming out from time to time. And we put together the working group. We figure out the working group schedule and the roles and the working plan and all of those things. And the working group meets and discusses, interviews maybe, does surveys, does research, puts their work together, and then starts forming their documents, which nearly always they put out for public comment. And you'll also see these announced from NISO from time to time. We try to always put out a document for public comment, either a period of 30 days or 45 days, so that people in the community have enough time to read it and then consider any feedback that should be taken into account by the working group, determine things that they might not have thought of or other perspectives, and then the working group takes that feedback in and maybe even reformulates their document. And then it gets, again, approved by topic committees and sometimes voting members in NISO, depending on if it's a standard or a recommended practice, and we'll publish it. We try to announce the publication as far and wide as possible so that people are able to use the material. And often, in fact, more often than not, we then, after publication of a particular standard or recommended practice, we will create a standing committee. And the standing committee's role is to help publicize, to help support, and also to determine any applicable maintenance for the document, because we really consider that the things that we do are not intended to be set in stone, cast in stone for all time. We really do want them to be living documents and to keep up with changes that happen in the industry. And we all know that changes happen to this industry every day. So as part of that, the Standing Committee's role is to determine when should the document be changed, how should it be changed, and then sort of start the process to go through some iterations of the document. So some of the things that Betty and I will be talking about over the course of these webinars are brand new publications. In fact, some, I think one I'll be talking about on Thursday has not even been published just yet, but many of them have gone through several iterations to remain applicable and as useful as possible through all of our career lifetimes. So I'll close this part of the introduction with a very hopeful comment that all of you will get involved with NISO in different ways. And the best way I can recommend to get involved, or at least know what's happening with NISO, is to subscribe to our newsletter. We put out a really good newsletter once a month. In fact, even before I worked at NISO, this was a newsletter I did not miss. I spent my lunch hour reading all of the links that would come out in this. And this newsline comes out once a month on email on the first Wednesday of the month, and you can subscribe very easily. And then every 3 months, we put together a sort of subset of newsline that we call Working Group Connection. And this is an update on all of the different current working groups and committees that are underway at NISO, where we state the status of their work and when they're expected to publish, or if they're soliciting feedback, et cetera. It's also possible to volunteer for these, either when you see them come up in Newsline, or let me know that you're interested in working in something, and we're happy to help with that. NISO also has a very active education committee that helps us plan our webinars and in-person events, and that kind of input is very much appreciated. The NISO website, we have NISO webinars, seems like almost every other week. In-person forums and open teleconferences take place once a month, and those are updated on our website. And then at every ALA, we are also putting together a standards update program where we have people who are working on the different committees come and talk about the kinds of things that they're doing. So with that, I'm going to move into the content of the presentation, and I will take a sip of water. So the first item of standards business, standards and recommended practice business that Betty and I put together on the program for today is to discuss counter and Sushi. And these are actually two different entities, but they are very much related. And I really do think that it's impossible to use Sushi without counter, but I think it's also would be very hard to use counter without Sushi. So counter started as Project Counter, and it began its life in the 2000-2001 time period, when more and more electronic products were being made available to libraries, and libraries were transitioning from a world mainly of print subscriptions to electronic subscriptions. And they were finding that electronic subscriptions afforded many capabilities that weren't possible in the print world, namely that of having a better idea of what is getting used. But in the world of electronic subscriptions with different publishers maintaining different platforms, it was very difficult to understand what statistics that were reported by one publisher meant especially when you compared them to statistics that were reported by another publisher on another platform with different technologies. And in the early days, it really was a battle of measuring apples to oranges for these librarians who had this great capability, electronic usage statistics, but couldn't really use it because there wasn't any definitions of what these things were, and publishers didn't have any recommendations to follow. So Counter came about really because of this vacuum that existed, and it is, I'd say it's a membership organization. Many members are publishers, but also many members are libraries, and especially library consortia, who work together to create these definitions and different kinds of measurements, and then how these measurements come together into various reports. So a journal report, or a different type of journal report, or a report of database usage, all trying to use the same terminology and the same definitions so that people publishers could apply them to their products, and then that libraries could compare products against each other. And it's really all about consistency. I'd say Counter is not a formal standard. That is, it's not, say, an ANSI standard or a British standards industry standard, but it is a de facto standard. It's a recommendation that has been put in place and is in very wide-ranging use across different entities in our business world, although I am aware that it's not in use everywhere. So that may also be a thorn in the side of different people. Counter is maintained by an executive committee that consists of various stakeholders, and so they have to do the work of hashing out the different definitions. And I hope that you are aware that there is a relatively new release of Counter, that's a Code of Practice Release 4, that was published about 2 years ago. Sorry about that. Code of Practice went into release, was released 2 years ago, and publishers had time to read it, determine what kinds of developments they needed to undertake on their side, and it went into effect at the beginning of this year, so that anyone who is not using the Code of Practice Release 4 cannot say that they are Counter compliant. And what Code of Practice Release 4 consists of is some further definitions, some modifications and expansions to the reports. I think a fairly major aspect of this release is that support for Sushi is now required, which is a really wonderful thing from my perspective as the supporter of Sushi. And there is also a register that exists of who is compliant for the different vendors and products that these vendors create. So what does Sushi consist of? Sushi is basically a way to make Counter easier to ingest. And before Sushi existed, Counter reports were becoming the standard way of transmitting usage, but libraries had to go to each vendor individually, log in, download a report, take it back to their local hard drive, and then do the same for the next one. And when you've got dozens, hundreds of different reports to look after, this kind of manual logging in, downloading is not something that is a good use of anyone's time. So Sushi was put together as a way to communicate this Counter data in an XML schema. So there's further technical definitions that are transmitted to publishers that publishers then follow to formulate their data into XML so that it can be then requested by a server or a client requests the data from a server and then downloads it automatically to somewhere that can start to make use of that data. This became a NISO standard, I'd say about 5 years ago, 5, 6 years ago, and it has undergone several revisions since then as well. It is maintained by a standing committee, and that standing committee consists of libraries, vendors, and publishers, and it meets monthly. In fact, it's meeting this coming Thursday. And their work is to mainly keep abreast of what's going on with Counter and what changes in Counter then might necessitate changes in Sushi, and then also what are things that are coming on the horizon, what kinds of technology should Sushi take advantage of in the future. And Sushi consists of the standard document. There's a profile that gives some more specific instructions on how it should be applied in different particular scenarios. And again, there's a registry that keeps track of the different vendors that are supporting Sushi. And I think as we move forward into 2014 and 2015, the registry of who's compliant with Counter and who's compliant with Sushi will essentially become the same things, because you do have to support Sushi to be Counter compliant. One thing I did want to mention is that Sushi, being a technical standard, is probably in most cases more apt to be applied by system vendors who create either usage statistics modules or electronic resource management products that are intended to make use of Counter data more automatically. There are a few individuals who have written Sushi clients, and if you have the technological capability of your library, that's absolutely something you can do, is write a client to make use of Sushi. But I think in most cases, you as librarians, you would see Sushi going on behind the scenes, being applied by your publishers and your system vendors. Okay, so I just wanted to say a few things that are coming down the pike and that are new for both Counter and Sushi. And I think it's important, as I mentioned earlier, that all of these standards effort really don't sit in a vacuum, that they take stock of what's going on around them and work to be as useful as possible. And the things that Counter has been doing in the last year, 2 years, has been looking at, number one, more granular usage. So right now, Counter measures usage for journals and databases. And this is very useful if you're looking at something in the aggregate. What's my usage for the Journal of Biological Chemistry? What's my usage for the journal title Brain? These are the products that I buy, and I'm interested in knowing how many people are reading things from this, because that's the way that I buy it. But I think that you are also probably noticing that more and more things like articles are getting more attention, more individual attention. And in some ways, you think that a journal is really a bit of a historical packaging of a set of articles. And I think in the future, more and more, we'll see articles become more of their own thing. So Counter is following along with that and has put together a code of practice for articles. And you can get that on the Project Counter website. If you just Google Project Counter, it'll take you right there. And the code of practice for articles is something that is, I think, starting to get a little bit of traction. It doesn't yet carry the same weight as the Counter Code of Practice for journals and databases does, but it is a starting point and a way that we can measure how articles are used on a more individual basis. So it gives you something else to track or look at when you're trying to evaluate different things. And I think the different parties for evaluation might not be libraries, they might be administrators or others who are more interested in an article-based approach. Similarly, we see also that the Counter Code of Practice for the usage factor is also something that's new within the last several months. And that is a little bit trying to put together an evaluation factor for journals that is weighting the usage of the journal a little bit as compared to a citation factor, where a citation factor measures citation weight across a journal. This takes stock of the different articles in a particular journal and how they are being used. So you can use it to compare journals irrespective of their size or their area of work. So what's Sushi been up to? The Sushi Harvesting Initiative has been working on, more recently, the newest release of Sushi, which is currently being voted on by NISO members, and we'll probably be publishing it before the end of the year, does some more work in terms of definitions of filters. Sushi has a definition for filter, but it's been only applied to the date parameter. So you could request a Sushi report from date X to date Y. But there's other ways to use filters. So for example, where reports now often contain a lot of zero usage items because no one's used a particular journal in a particular time period, it is possible, if you want to filter those out so that you're not sending a very large report just full of zeros off to a customer. It's also theoretically possible to put together a filter for a specific departmental IP range if that's how you are tracking different users, or if that's one way that you're tracking different users in your institution to see how things are being used in a particular area. And other filters in addition to these could also be applied. There is also a subgroup of the Sushi Standing Committee, which is called itself Sushi Light, and they are doing a technical report. And this is not either a standard or a recommended practice. A technical report is more like a study or a white paper that surveys the landscape, maybe puts together some recommendations that might be taken into account in the future, provides more analysis in a particular area. And what this group is doing is studying how could Sushi be made easier to use. Right now, Sushi uses a SOAP, which is a kind of older protocol to transmit XML files across the internet. And SOAP is a little bit outdated and makes these reports very large. But there are other technologies that are more in use nowadays, such as HTTP REST, that allow smaller sets of data to be sent a little bit more easily. So this Sushi Light group is studying how could HTTP REST be applied to Sushi, and maybe the data could be a little bit easier to transmit. And also, as you saw with the counter article report, how could article level data be transmitted? Well, Sushi Light, these kinds of snippets might be applicable here. So this technical report, I think, will be published, I hope, by early 2015. And that isn't meant to go into effect. It's simply meant to give all of the people in the community something to examine, something to think about how they might apply these proposed solutions in a technological way, and then in the future is when we would be making changes to the actual Sushi standard. We have a page in the Sushi area that is written especially for librarians. The librarians who serve on the Standing Committee have worked hard in the last year or so to bring this area up to date, so I really urge all of you to take a look at it. And I think that is the end of my presentation, and I am very happy to turn the baton at this time over to my colleague, Betty Landesman, who will be speaking next.
Hi, everybody. This is Betty. And just to, as Nettie pointed out, just to remind you, Nettie's the one on the left. She just finished. And I'm the one on the right. and I'm just starting. And it'll be my pleasure to pick up where Nettie left off and talk to you about SERU and transfer. SERU is the Shared Electronic Resource Understanding. It can be used as an alternative to a license agreement, thereby eliminating a lot of time and effort negotiating license after license after license. It's a statement that expresses commonly shared understandings between the content provider and the subscribing institution on matters such as who's an authorized user, the nature of the content, permissible use of materials, privacy and confidentiality, online performance and service, and archiving and perpetual access. It was first adopted as a NISO recommended practice, RP7, in 2008, with a focus on e-journal transactions between the library and the publisher. It was then updated in 2012 to include language that can be applied to a variety of e-resources, including e-books. So how does SERU work? The SERU document, including statements of common understandings for acquiring electronic resources, is available on the NISO website. And you'll have all the URLs on the slides. This is an experiment to see how clunky this transfer to the internet might be. Well, it's not too bad. Okay, here's SERU. And when you click on that link, this is where you get. And you will note that it contains statements of common understandings for acquiring electronic resources. These statements articulate standard business practices, such as who's an authorized user and what are accepted uses of the material. Any of you that have had to deal with a license will recognize these areas where you, for the most part, or at least often, these areas are the same from license to license. There's some standard wording. Everybody agrees on who an authorized user is, and there's no controversy. So the ability to simply refer to these statements means that no license is required, and that copyright would then simply govern the use of the material, same as it is the case for print. So if both the library and the publisher agree to use SERU in place of a license, the library sends a document, could be an email, could be a purchase order, to the publisher stating that they are using SERU, along with any terms or concerns that are not included in SERU. Now my next slide is an actual example from my own experience, which sure made me realize how valuable this could be. It's a real win-win for publishers and libraries, in my opinion. We were going to order the APA Style Guide to Electronic References, 6th edition, in electronic form. I don't have a credit card. I don't have, the person who does use the credit card, and so anything that we order that doesn't go through our book job or goes through him is, well, let's just say I've repeatedly tried to convey that if he's ordering something electronic, please let me sit with him to look at the terms of the license before he clicks on anything, but who knows. Luckily, when we went to order the APA Style Guide, I saw that the SERU agreement was an option to the click-through license. So I could just say, make sure you click on that, and I knew exactly what the terms were, and I knew they were okay. So now that we're all fired up, where do you start? Well, one good place to start is consult the SERU for Librarians page, Getting Started with SERU for Libraries. Which is right here on the NISO website again. And it gives you a real great overview explanation. And please also note that in addition to SERU for libraries, there is a SERU for publishers page to answer publishers' questions and not just librarians' questions. We're all in this together. You can join the registry, and the publishers can join the registry. The registry lists both the publishers wishing to use SERU with any of their products and libraries or consortia wishing to have SERU apply to any of their resources. So if you are going to access, you're wanting to purchase something or license something and it's a publisher you're not already dealing with specifically, see if they're on the registry. And if they are, you might be able to bypass a lot of time and effort in negotiating that license agreement that says who your authorized users are. And if they're not, ask them why not. For even more information, you can just go directly to the main SERU homepage, which I've been showing you parts of. Sorry, that was bad grammar. So here's the main page. It's got the text of RP7 2012, tells you what it is, links you to the text of it, SERU for librarians, SERU for publishers, the registry, all that good stuff. You can see who's on the standing committee charged with providing ongoing support and maintenance of the recommended practice. And you can join the SERU Info listserv. Now, lest you think that that's just for NISO people or just for the SERU committee or anything like that, absolutely not. It is an open list. It's available for anyone interested in SERU. You can ask questions, you can share experiences, you can get updates, anything you want. And the instructions on how to sign up are also on the SERU webpage. Transfer, which as you can see is a UKSG initiative. And if in case anyone doesn't know, UKSG stands for the United Kingdom Serials Group, is a set of guidelines to help ensure continued accessibility to journal content when there is a transfer between parties. What that means is when you subscribe to online content from a journal who is currently published by publisher A, and the journal changes to publisher B, you keep your access. That's a very short version of this. The Transfer Code of Practice is a set of voluntary best practice guidelines for publishers involved in the transfer of a journal between publishers. These guidelines include those for provision of ongoing access to the online content, the exchange of the subscriber lists, DOI and URL transfer, and perpetual access rights to journal content. The UKSG Transfer Working Group released the first version of the Code of Practice in 2006. Version 2.0 was published in September 2008, and version 3.0 is very recent. It's March of this year. And this is the main transfer page, and from there you can link to everything that I'm going to continue to talk about. So how does transfer work? The Transfer Code of Practice contains roles and responsibilities of both the transferring and the receiving publishers. And it is in full form available here on the Transfer website. It provides specifically guidelines both for the transferring publisher, that was publisher A in my scenario, which include digital files, digital content files, access to the title, subscriber and non-subscriber access, other content and data types, journal URL, communication, and identifier information, and guidelines for the receiving publisher, including access to the title, licensing terms, communication, subscription lists, and identifier information. There's supplementary information and glossary documents which aren't part of the code itself, and they too are available on the transfer website. On the website is a list of endorsing publishers. Now, please note that Oxford University Press is an endorsing publisher. I bring this up because coincidentally, and this is a true story, a few days ago I received a Dear Subscriber letter from Oxford University Press informing me that Oxford journals, starting January 1st, 2015, will take over publishing a journal currently published by somebody else to which we subscribe. As a current subscriber, my details were passed on to them by the previous publisher, entered into their database, etc., etc., etc. And then the payoff, upon receipt of our renewal, I will be sent an order confirmation letter or email together with full details on how to access content if we have an online subscription, which we do. So there's transfer in action. Transfer, it also includes an enhanced transfer alerting service, which is designed to facilitate communication of journal transfers. And it comprises a journal transfer notification database, which can serve as an archive of transfer information supplied by publishers using the service, a journal transfer notification form for participating publishers, the transfer notification blog. Can't say there's not a lot of information out there. And for your most up-to-date notification pleasure, you can join the transfer notification list to get email alerts when a journal transfer is announced. Now, I don't mean to be glib about this, but if you are new to this list, you should be prepared for the fact that there is a lot of traffic, which is a really good thing in that lots of people are participating. So as you delete a bunch of journals you don't care about, when you get the one that's about the journal you do care about and you hear about it first, it's worth it. So where does NISO fit into this process? The transfer initiative is in the process of moving from the UKSG to NISO. And as Nettie described the overall structure and process of NISO, a NISO standing committee will provide ongoing support, education, and revisions of the Code of Practice. NISO voting members have approved this step, and coordination efforts are underway to have the next meeting of the Transfer Committee take place as a NISO standing committee. NISO will then republish transfer as a NISO recommended practice. So at this point, I'm going to turn the session over to Allison to wrap up.
This is Allison. I want to give people an opportunity to ask any questions they might have of Nettie and Betty. We have a question box that you can type questions into. But if there aren't any questions, and we can, if there's people who have questions that want to send stuff later, I'm sure Nettie and Betty can answer things as well.
Yes, I'm happy to do that too.
Sure, that'd be great.
Thank you. So I want to thank Nettie and Betty for their presentation and want to thank all of you for attending this webinar. I also want to thank Joseph Nicholson for providing technical support and recording it. We hope we will look for future ALCTS programs on the website listed above, and please fill out the evaluation when you receive it and help us develop more programs that you are interested in. If you're attending both parts, you only need to submit one survey. And again, thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody in ALCTS and the audience.
Much appreciated. Thanks a lot.